The Alpha King chose the ugly duckling at the mating auction, then uncovered a secret that changed everything, a true real-life story, told in the third person. Nobody looked at Elara when she walked into a room. Not really. They looked past her, through her, around her. She had grown so used to it that she stopped noticing the space she took up. She moved quietly. She kept her eyes down. She did what she was told, and when she was done, she disappeared into whatever corner was available and waited for the next instruction. That was her life in the Ironmere Pack compound. She cooked before anyone else woke up. She cleaned what other people left behind. She carried things that were too heavy and stayed up past midnight finishing tasks that others had forgotten. Complaining required energy, and she had learned a long time ago that energy was a resource she could not afford to waste on things that would not change. She was 22 years old, and most people in her pack treated her like furniture. Her stepsister Mira was everything she was not. Mira walked into rooms, and conversations stopped. She was tall, sharp-featured, magnetic in the way that certain people are when the world has spent years telling them how beautiful and special they are. She wore her confidence like a crown. She was also cruel in the small, quiet way that people can be when they have never faced real difficulty. Not loud cruelty, not the kind that leaves marks people can point to, the kind that leaves tiny holes in a person over years until they forget there was ever anything solid there. Elara had lived with Mira's small cruelties since she was 14. A sneer, a whispered comment to a friend, the way Mira would take credit for things Elara had done, and Elara would say nothing, because saying something would only make things worse. The way Mira borrowed things without asking and returned them damaged, or not at all, and looked at Elara with an expression that dared her to say something about it. She never did. There was one thing Mira could not take from her, though she had tried. Elara had a friend. Her name was Zara, and she was the pack's resident healer, and she was the only person in the entire compound who spoke to Elara like she was a person and not a piece of background scenery. Zara was small and quick, and had a laugh that came out of nowhere and filled a room. She brought Elara food when Elara forgot to eat. She said her name warmly, the way people say the names of people they are genuinely glad to know. It was Zara who told her about the mating auction, not that Elara didn't already know. Everyone knew. The mating auction was not exactly a secret. It was an old tradition, centuries old, held once a year at a neutral location called the Veyrath Summit. Wolf packs from across the territory sent their unmated females to stand on a platform while unmated alphas, betas, and other high-ranking males chose among them. It was called a tradition. It was, in many ways, a market, and once a family placed you there, you had no say in who took you home. Elara had been placed on the list by her stepfather without discussion. She had found out about it by reading a document he had left on the kitchen table. She read her own name on a printed form, saw the box checked, saw the section marked status, and the words written inside it, wolfless, no bid floor. She had set the form back on the table. She had finished washing the dishes. Then she had gone to her room, sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and stared at the wall for a very long time. She was listed last on the program, below the description of the venue, below the catering notes, an afterthought at the bottom of a page that nobody would read carefully. She did not tell Zara she had seen the form. Zara found out anyway, the way Zara always found things out, and she came to Elara's room that evening and sat beside her on the bed without saying anything, and after a while she took Elara's hand and held it, and Elara did not cry, but she held on tightly. "Maybe nobody will pick you," Zara said finally, which was a strange thing to say for comfort, but Elara understood what she meant. "And then you come home, and nothing changes, and we forget this ever happened. That's the best case," Elara said. "Yes," Zara agreed. "That's the best case." They sat like that for a while longer, and then Elara said she needed to sleep, and Zara left, and Elara lay in the dark and thought about what the worst case looked like. She had imagined it enough times, someone picking her out of pity, or someone picking her because they wanted something compliant and uncomplicated. Being taken to a pack she didn't know, expected to perform a role she'd never prepared for, surrounded by people who would see her the exact same way her own people did. Invisible, defective, a convenience, not a person. She thought about that for a long time. Then she fell asleep, because she had to be up at 4 in the morning to start breakfast, and the world did not stop turning for the ways it hurt you. The night before the auction, she packed a small bag. She did not know if she would come back. That thought was neither sad nor hopeful. It was just a fact she had decided to be practical about. The Veyrath summit was 3 hours away by car. Elara sat in the back seat of the transport van with 7 other females from the pack, none of whom spoke to her directly. Mira sat at the front, talking the whole way, filling the silence with her own voice, which she was very good at. Elara looked out the window and watched the trees go past. The summit hall was large and cold. High ceilings, chandeliers, polished floors. It smelled like wealth and power, and the specific kind of tension that fills a room when everyone in it is performing a version of themselves they want other people to believe. Elara stood in a line with the other females on the raised platform that ran along the left wall of the hall, and she looked at her shoes, and she breathed slowly, and she made herself very small inside her own body. She was wearing a gray dress. It had once been white, maybe, years ago, before Mira had borrowed it for something and returned it with a faint discoloration down the left side that had never fully washed out. It fit her. That was all that could be said for it. Mira was in red. Mira was always in red at things like this. The hall filled. Alphas from different packs arrived in clusters, moving with that particular kind of quiet authority that powerful people learn to carry. Their wolves sat close to the surface, visible in the way they held themselves, in the controlled ease of their movements. Elara watched them without appearing to watch. She had spent years learning to observe, without looking like she was observing. You learned that when you were invisible. You saw everything, because no one was watching you see. She noticed the moment the hall shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no announcement, no trumpet, no formal entrance. Just a change in the air, a small collective straightening, conversations lowering a half note, heads turning toward the main doors in a way that was too coordinated to be coincidence. He walked in the way that people walk when they have never once in their lives had to make themselves smaller. His name was Caspian Blackthorn, and he was the Alpha King. Elara knew this before she consciously processed it, the way you know a fire is hot before you actually touch it. He was tall, dark hair, cut short, a jaw that looked like it had been put together by someone who took the job seriously. He wore a plain dark jacket, no decoration, no ceremony. He did not need decoration. The room already knew what he was. He walked in with 3 people at his sides. An older man with a sharp expression who was clearly some kind of advisor. 2 others who moved like guards, without looking like guards. Caspian himself seemed completely unbothered by the weight of attention on him, which Elara suspected was not numbness but something much more difficult to achieve. He simply did not require the attention. He glanced around the hall with the measured efficiency of someone checking off boxes. This was an obligation, not a preference. That much was clear from the way he held himself. His wolf was there behind his eyes, watchful, but not particularly engaged. He was going through the motions. The auction began. Elara watched the platform fill and empty. Mira was presented forth. 3 separate people tried to bid on her, and a small, elegant war broke out between them that the auctioneer pretended to struggle to manage. Mira smiled the whole time. It was a smile Elara recognized, the one that came when Mira had already won something and was enjoying watching everyone else catch up. One by one the women were chosen. Some looked relieved, some looked scared, one looked utterly blank, and Elara thought she was probably doing the same thing Elara herself was doing, which was deciding not to feel anything about this for as long as possible. Then her name was called. Elara Voss, status, wolfless, listed last per program, no bid floor. The auctioneer's voice did not change when he read it. He read her like he read everything else, in the same flat professional tone. But the hall had a different quality when her name was called. Not loud, quieter actually. The kind of quiet that falls when nobody has anything to say because there is nothing interesting happening. She stepped forward on the platform. She looked at the floor. She waited. Silence. Not the interesting kind of silence, not the kind that meant people were considering something, just empty silence. The kind that meant no one was going to raise their hand. She was not surprised. She had prepared herself for this. She kept her breathing even. She kept her face still. In another 30 seconds the auctioneer would move on, mark her as unclaimed in his program, and she would step off the platform and sit in a corner until the transport van took everyone back, and that would be that. She was counting the seconds. Then she heard it. Not a shout, not an announcement. Just a quiet word from somewhere in the back of the room. "I will." Elara looked up. Caspian Blackthorn was standing with his hand half raised. Not a dramatic gesture. Not even a confident one, really. It was the gesture of someone who had made a decision in the last 3 seconds and had not fully processed it themselves yet. His advisor beside him looked like someone had just poured cold water down his back. The room had gone very still. Elara stared at him. He looked back at her. She waited for the joke to reveal itself. She waited for someone to laugh, for someone to explain that this was a mistake, for him to lower his hand and say he had meant to gesture at someone else. She gave it 5 full seconds. His hand did not come down. She looked away first. She looked at the floor and counted her breaths and listened to the sound of the room trying to recalibrate around something none of them had expected. What happened next was not quiet. The advisor moved to Caspian's side immediately, and whatever he said was low enough that Elara couldn't hear it from the platform, but she could read the shape of it clearly enough. Concern. Objection. The particular body language of a man trying to talk a powerful person out of something without appearing to be trying to talk a powerful person out of something. Caspian listened. He nodded once. Then he said something brief, and the advisor went very still and did not speak again. Mira's father, Lord Voss, pushed through the crowd to lodge what he called a formal concern with the auctioneer. Elara heard phrases like protocol irregularity and precedent for the registry, and the girl has no wolf. The auctioneer listened with the exhausted professionalism of someone who had heard everything in this job and was still being surprised by new things. He looked down at his papers. He looked up. He said that the king's choice was within the rules as written and he could not override it. Lord Voss looked at Elara the way he had looked at her since she was 14 years old, which was like she had done something wrong simply by existing, and then he walked away. The papers were signed at a table off to the side. Caspian signed them himself without delegating it. Elara stood a few feet away and watched this happen and still could not make sense of it. A palace attendant handed her a small card with a number to call if she needed to communicate with the king's household ahead of the journey. She took the card. She held it. She did not know what to say. Caspian walked toward her when the paperwork was done. He stopped at a polite distance and looked at her for a moment. Then he extended his hand, palm up, a formal gesture of escort. Elara looked at his hand. She thought about what it meant to take it. What it implied. What she would be agreeing to simply by letting someone lead her somewhere. She had been led places her whole life by people who had not asked her opinion, and she was tired, and she did not want to be led. She walked past his hand and through the door. There was a pause behind her. She was half certain he would call her back, and she had already decided what she was going to do if he did. He did not call her back. When she was in the corridor, she heard footsteps behind her, unhurried, and then he was walking beside her, not in front, not behind, just beside, matching her pace without commenting on any of it. They did not speak until they reached the vehicle. An attendant opened the door. Elara got in. Caspian got in after her. The attendant closed the door. The car started moving. Elara looked out the window. Caspian was 3 feet away from her, and the distance felt like an agreement neither of them had made out loud. 40 minutes of silence. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just present. The road outside was dark, the kind of thick rural dark that swallows light completely, and Elara watched it and let her mind settle. Then he spoke. "What are you afraid of?" She turned to look at him. It was a strange question to ask someone in this situation. There were 100 practical, polite, normal questions he could have asked. He had skipped all of them. "Nothing anymore," she said. He looked at her. She could not tell what he was thinking. His face was not difficult or cold, exactly. It was just not easy to read, like a page in a language you almost know. "You don't believe that," he said. She looked back out the window. "Maybe not." Silence again, but a slightly different one. Slightly warmer, or maybe just more honest. "Why did you choose me?" she asked. She had not planned to ask it. It came out before she could decide whether it was a good idea. There were others. "You know that. Better options by any measure anyone would use." "I know," he said. "So why?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how to explain it to you in a way that will make sense." She turned her head to look at him again. "Try." He looked out his own window. "My wolf went quiet when I saw you. He's been restless for years. He went quiet." He paused. "I don't ignore him when he's that certain." Elara processed this. It was not the answer she had expected. It was not flattery or pity or politics. It was just a man telling her, plainly, that something in him had reacted to something in her, and he had followed it. She did not know what to do with that. So she said nothing, and they rode the rest of the way in silence, and she moved slightly closer to the window, and he did not comment on this, and they did not speak again until the car stopped. The palace was large. That was the first thing she noticed. Not large the way rich people's houses were large, with too many rooms that felt empty and decorated for guests that never came. Large the way things are large when they have weight behind them. History in the walls. The kind of building that has seen so much happen inside it that the stone itself seems aware. She was given her own rooms, plural. A bedroom, a sitting area, a bathroom larger than the entire space she had occupied at the compound. A wardrobe stocked with clothes she hadn't chosen. The bed had 4 posts and curtains and sheets that were pressed flat and cool when she touched them. She stood in the center of the bedroom and looked at it for a long time. A palace attendant showed her around and explained what was available to her, where the dining room was, which floors she could access freely, who to speak to if she needed anything. The woman was professional and warm and asked no questions, which Elara was grateful for because she didn't have answers yet. When the attendant left, Elara sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the room. She looked at the curtains. She thought about the gray dress she was still wearing, and about the compound kitchen, and about Zara, and about the card with the phone number in her bag. She would call Zara tomorrow. She would tell her she was fine, which was not exactly true but was more true than the alternative. She would ask Zara to send her one specific book, the old worn-out copy of a history of pack law that she had been reading in pieces for months. It had been sitting on her windowsill at the compound with a ribbon keeping her place. She fell asleep still dressed, on top of the sheets, curled on her side with her hands under her cheek. She woke up at 4 in the morning from habit, lay there for a moment realizing there was nothing she needed to do at 4 in the morning here, and went back to sleep. This felt stranger than anything else about the day. The first official visitor came 2 days later. Elder Hawthorne was the king's chief advisor. She was a woman who had, at some point in her life, decided that warmth was a luxury she couldn't afford, and had since stopped paying for it. She was sharp and precise, and dressed in the gray and black that seemed to be the uniform of people who had held power long enough that they no longer needed to dress to impress. She sat across from Elara in the small sitting area of her rooms, teacup in hand, and looked at her with an expression that said very clearly that she was doing an assessment and had already formed a preliminary opinion. "You should understand," Hawthorne said, "that the king's choice was unusual." "I'm aware," Elara said. "His people are—" Hawthorne paused, selecting her word carefully. "Uncertain. They expected someone who could support his position politically, someone with connections, a strong wolf bloodline, someone visible. Someone like my stepsister." Hawthorne's expression did not change. "Someone who brings clear value to the alliance." Elara looked at the older woman evenly. She had spent years being told versions of this same thing. "You are not enough. You are not the right kind. You are not what was needed." She was very practiced at receiving this information without showing what it did to her inside. "What would you like me to do about that?" Elara asked. Hawthorne blinked. It was very small, barely visible, but Elara caught it. The old woman had expected either defensiveness or deflation. She had not expected a practical question. "I would like you," Hawthorne said slowly, "to manage expectations, not to create impressions of influence or permanence that do not yet exist." Elara nodded. "I have no such impressions. I barely know where the dining room is." There was a pause. Then Hawthorne said, "Good." She set down her teacup. She stood. She looked at Elara one more time, and there was something in the look that was not quite respect, but was perhaps the beginning of consideration. Then she left, and Elara poured herself the rest of the tea and drank it slowly, thinking about the shape of the conversation and what it had revealed. Caspian called her to his study on the third day. The study was full of books and stacked papers, and had two large windows that let in good afternoon light. He was standing at one of them when she arrived, looking out at the grounds below. He turned when she entered. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and waited until she sat before he sat down himself. This was a small thing, but she noticed it. "I want to be clear with you about what this is," he said, "and what it is not." "All right," she said. "The mate bond has not activated. I don't know if it will. I chose you because my wolf told me to, and I have learned to trust that even when I don't understand the reason. That is the honest truth of it." She nodded. She appreciated the plainness. "I will not pretend anything with you," he continued. "I'm not going to pretend there is more between us than there is. But I also will not make you a prisoner here. You are not property. You are not a decoration. You will be treated with respect by everyone in this palace, and if you are not, I want to know about it." "All right," she said again. She was quiet for a moment. "What do you actually need from me?" He looked at her. "What do you mean? You brought me here for a reason. Even if it's a reason you don't fully understand, there's something you need. What is it?" He leaned back slightly. It was the first time she had seen him look, just for a moment, slightly uncertain. "Public presence. I need to appear in public with a chosen partner. My council has been pressuring me about this for 2 years. I need to be seen attending certain events without attending them alone. And in exchange, safety, comfort, whatever you need within reason." He paused. "What do you want?" She thought about this seriously. He seemed like a man who wanted a real answer, not a polite deflection. "Access to your library," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "That's all?" "That's what I want." He nodded once, without negotiating, without hedging. "The library is yours." She stood to leave. As she passed the desk, she was close enough that she caught his scent properly for the first time. Something in her chest pulled, sharp and sudden, like a note played on a string that had been wound too tight. She moved toward the door and did not look back. Behind her she heard nothing, but she was almost certain that he did not move for several seconds after she left. She spent her evenings in the library. It was 3 floors up in the east wing, and it ran the full length of the building, and it smelled the way old libraries always smell, like paper and time and the weight of other people's thoughts. She loved it immediately in the uncomplicated way that people love places that ask nothing of them in return. She was not only reading for pleasure. For 4 years she had been searching, quietly and privately, for an explanation for what had happened on the night of her 18th birthday. She had been alone in the field behind the compound that night, the traditional night when young wolves were expected to shift for the first time. She had waited. She had felt the pull of it, the pressure building in her blood, and she had not been afraid because she had always been told this was natural and right, and the moment when she would finally understand what she was. And then she had shifted. It had not felt like what she had been told. It had not been a wolf that came out of her. It had been something else, something older, something she had no name for. Silver light everywhere, pooling out of her skin like water. And then a sound from the direction of the compound, the sound of 30 wolves dropping to their knees simultaneously, a collective thud she had felt through the ground. She had stopped it in terror. She had pulled it back in, pressed it down, sealed it inside herself with every ounce of will she had. She had shifted it back to something that looked like what people expected, a woman standing in a field, nothing unusual, no reason to look twice. No one had come to check on her. No one had asked why 30 wolves had briefly gone to their knees. It had happened too fast, and people found ways to explain things that didn't fit their understanding, and no one in her pack had ever looked closely enough at her to wonder. She had spent 4 years pretending it hadn't happened. But she knew something was inside her that she did not have words for, something that frightened her not because it felt evil, but because it felt enormous. And enormousness, in a person who had been told their whole life that they were nothing, felt like a lie she wasn't sure she deserved to believe. In Caspian's library, she found a section of restricted historical texts that required a key. She did not have a key. She found a librarian and asked politely if she could be given access. The librarian looked at her, then looked at his instruction sheet, which apparently listed her as permitted access to all floors and collections. He gave her the key. The book was old, centuries old, the pages soft with age. It was titled A Record of Ancient Bloodlines and Their Fates, and it was written in the plain, factual language of someone who had been documenting things that other people found uncomfortable to acknowledge. She read it for 3 nights before she found the section she was looking for. It was not long, 12 pages, careful, measured, methodical documentation of a bloodline called the Silver Fang. She read those 12 pages 4 times. Then she closed the book and sat very still in the library, while the clock on the wall ticked and the fire in the reading corner burned down to coals. The Silver Fang bloodline. Wolves who carried, in their blood, the original command frequency of the first progenitor wolf. Not an aggressive power, not a weapon exactly, more like a tuning fork that made everything around it vibrate in harmony. When a Silver Fang shifted fully, every wolf within range went instinctively, involuntarily to their knees. Not because they were being attacked, because their wolves recognized something older and more fundamental than themselves, the way a river recognizes the sea. The last Silver Fang had been alive 500 years ago. The pack elders of that era had declared the bloodline a threat to the political order. They had been hunted. The records on what followed were careful to use passive language, which meant that what followed was something the writers knew was wrong but had been instructed to document without judgment. None had survived. The bloodline was extinct. Except, apparently, it wasn't. Elara sat in the library and looked at the fire and thought about the night in the field and the sound of 30 wolves going to their knees. Then she opened the book again and read it a 5th time, making sure she had not misunderstood anything. She had not. She put the book back exactly where she had found it. She walked back to her rooms. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. She did not sleep for a long time. 2 weeks in, Caspian told her about the formal dinner. 6 other alpha couples. A political gathering dressed as a social occasion. He told her without apology that he needed her present, and that she would be watched closely and judged quickly, because that was how these things worked, and he thought she deserved to know the truth rather than being surprised by it. She asked him what was expected of her. He said, "Be present, be composed, do not feel obligated to perform warmth she did not feel." She found this so different from what she had expected that she didn't know how to respond to it immediately. She thanked him. He looked slightly uncomfortable receiving the thanks, which she noted. She wore dark blue. Caspian had sent the dress without explanation, and it fit perfectly, which unsettled her in ways she had not expected. She did not mention it. She put it on and looked at herself in the mirror and thought, this is a different kind of invisible. Not invisible because no one can see you. Invisible because you have chosen what they see. The dinner was exactly as described. Polished, warm on the surface, cold underneath. The other alphas were careful with Caspian, respectful in the particular way that people are with someone who has more power than them. Their partners ranged from comfortable to performing. Elara sat at Caspian's right and made herself quiet and observant in the way she was best at. Elder Hawthorne sat at the far end of the table. She asked Elara questions during the soup course that were designed to sound like conversation and were actually assessments. Elara answered them plainly and honestly and did not try to seem like more than she was. Hawthorne's expression shifted, barely, toward something that might have been approval. The beta wife to Elara's left was less careful. She was the kind of woman who mistook quietness for weakness, and after 40 minutes she had made 3 comments that were shaped like pleasantries and functioned as dismissals. The third one was about Elara's background, phrased beautifully, a masterwork of polite condescension. Elara waited until the table had moved on. Then, in a gap in the conversation, she said something quiet and precise and accurate about the beta wife's own pack's recent diplomatic misstep, phrased with perfect courtesy and devastating accuracy, the kind of thing that could not be argued with because it was simply true. The table went briefly quiet. Then the conversation moved on, as conversations do. Elara looked at her plate. She felt Caspian shift beside her, barely, the smallest adjustment of posture. She glanced at him. His expression had not changed, but there was something behind his eyes that had not been there before. Later, when the guests were gone and the hall had emptied and she was about to go to her rooms, he said her name once, quietly, from across the room. She stopped. "That was well done," he said. "Not effusive, not overwarm, just true." "Thank you," she said. She did not look away from him this time. They held the look for a moment longer than necessary. Then she said goodnight, and she went to her rooms, and she sat by the window and thought about the shape of things changing. The nightmare was not dramatic. That was almost the worst thing about it. It was just her packed kitchen at 4 in the morning. The dark, the sound of something she couldn't name, and the sensation she had been carrying for 4 years of something enormous pressing against the inside of her chest, trying to get out, and her pressing back, refusing, because she was afraid of what she was and what people would do with it. She woke with a sharp sound she didn't realize was her own voice until it was already over. The room was dark. The clock said 2 in the morning. She was sitting up, both hands pressed flat to the mattress, breathing too fast. She was still working on slowing her breathing when the door opened. Caspian stood in the doorway. Not her door. She had realized by now that their suites shared a connecting hallway, and he must have heard her through it. He was in a plain shirt and dark trousers, clearly having been awake rather than woken, which meant he had not been sleeping either. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was waiting for a question, for an inquiry, for something she would need to manage. He didn't ask anything. He walked to the chair by her window and sat down in it, and he looked out the window at the dark grounds below. That was all. He just sat there. She lay back down slowly. She looked at the ceiling. The presence in the room was not intrusive. It was just there, like a warm weight on the other side of the balance. She did not know when she fell back asleep, but when she woke at 8 in the morning, the chair was occupied by a sleeping alpha king, with his head tilted back and his arms loosely folded, and there was a blanket over him that she had no memory of putting there. She stood for a moment and looked at him. Then she went to get ready for the day without waking him. She did not examine the blanket decision too closely. She had made it in the dark, half asleep, without thinking. Thinking about it now would only complicate things. She asked Caspian if Zara could come. She explained that Zara was a healer, and that the palace was, presumably, large enough to need one, and that she had reasons for wanting her close that she was not yet ready to explain fully. He said yes. No conditions. Just yes. Zara arrived 3 days later with 2 bags and a look on her face like someone who had been expecting a difficult situation and was rapidly revising her expectations. She stood in the entrance hall and looked up at the ceiling and then at Elara and said, "You're all right?" "I'm all right," Elara said. "You're really all right?" "Not I'm managing, and I'm going to tell you I'm fine to stop you from worrying." "All right?" "I'm actually all right," Elara said. Zara studied her for another moment. Then she said, "He's kind to you." It was not a question, exactly. Elara considered how to answer it honestly. "He's respectful. He's direct. He's not unkind. That's more than most people get," Zara said quietly. "Yes," Elara agreed. "It is." Later, when Elara told Zara about the book, about the Silver Fang, about what she had read, and what it confirmed about what she already knew, Zara listened all the way through without interrupting. That was one of Zara's gifts. She did not interrupt. She held space for the whole of a thing before she responded to any part of it. When Elara was done, Zara looked at her for a long moment. "You need to tell him," she said. "No," Elara said. "Elara, if I tell him, I become a political asset. I become a thing to be protected or used, depending on who's making the decision. I become the reason for conflict. I become something to be argued over. She looked at her hands. I've been a thing my whole life. I don't want to be a thing here. Zara was quiet for a moment. He chose you before he knew. What does that tell you? That he has good instincts, Elara said. It doesn't tell me how he'd respond to this. He might surprise you. He might. And he might not. And I am not ready to find out yet. Zara looked at her. All right, she said finally. But this won't stay hidden forever. You know that. I know, Elara said. I just need a little more time. She found the covered painting by accident. She had been exploring the palace on a restless afternoon, the way she sometimes did when the library felt too still, just walking the corridors and letting herself get slightly lost. She turned down a wing she hadn't been in before and found a long hallway that was slightly different from the others. The windows had curtains drawn, the frames on the walls were empty, and at the very end there was one large painting covered with a white cloth. She did not lift the cloth, but she stood in front of it for a moment, looking at the shape beneath the fabric. She asked Zara later, because Zara always knew things. Zara went quiet in a particular way, and then she told her about Lyra. Lyra had been chosen by Caspian 2 years before the auction, a beta female from the southern pack, well-connected, politically advantageous. The story went that a mate bond had appeared to activate between them. The story went that Caspian had believed it completely. It was, apparently, the one and only time anyone who knew him could remember seeing the Alpha King look openly hopeful about something personal. Lyra had faked it. She had found a healer willing to simulate the chemical signature of a bond. She had wanted pack status, a direct connection to the king's circle, access and influence. She had wanted all of this badly enough to deceive a man who had given her his trust. When Caspian found out, he had gone very quiet and stayed that way. He had removed every image, every reference, every trace. He had not spoken her name since. He had not opened himself to anything like it since. Elara stood in her sitting room after Zara told her this, and she looked out the window, and she thought about what it meant to be certain that something was real, and to find out it was the most carefully constructed lie you had ever been inside. She thought about how that changed the way you looked at everything that came after. She went back to the covered hallway the next morning. She still didn't lift the cloth, but she left one small wildflower from the window box in her room on the windowsill at the end of the corridor. One flower, just sitting there, for no reason she could name except that it seemed to say something she did not yet have words for. 3 days later she walked past the corridor, and the flower was gone. On the windowsill was a single leaf from one of the trees in the grounds below, laid there carefully, flat and clean and deliberate. She picked it up and took it back to her room and pressed it between 2 pages of the history book, and did not speak about this to anyone, and could not have explained why it felt like something significant without also feeling a little foolish. The chairs in the library had been moving, not literally, but over the weeks something had shifted about where they naturally ended up sitting, and by the time Elara noticed it consciously, their chairs were 3 feet apart instead of the 12 feet of different corners they had started with. It was a Tuesday evening. He came to the library around 9, which had become a fairly standard thing, though no one had said so out loud. He read dispatches, she read history. They occupied the same space in the particular comfortable way of people who have learned to exist near each other without requiring anything of that nearness. Elara was reading about pre-Accord Wolf politics. He was reading what looked like trade documentation. They had not spoken in 40 minutes. He reached past her. He was reaching for a reference book on the shelf directly behind her chair. She had not heard him stand. He was simply there, and his hand was next to hers on the armrest for the length of time it took him to lean and reach, which was not long, but was not instant either. Neither of them moved. His hand was not touching hers. There was a half-inch of air between them, but her entire focus had narrowed to that half-inch. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. It lasted 4 seconds. She counted them because she needed to do something with her attention that was not simply feeling what she was feeling. She stood up. She closed her book. She said goodnight. He said her name. She stopped. Her hand was on the back of her chair. He said it the way he sometimes said it, not functionally, not to get her attention, but in the way that meant something, in the way that she had started to notice and tried very hard not to assign meaning to. She did not turn around. She said goodnight again, and she walked out of the library, and in the corridor outside, she put her back against the wall and stood there for a full minute with her eyes closed. Her wolf was pressing at the inside of her chest, not trying to come out, just trying to make itself known. She told it firmly that it needed to wait. She was not ready. He was not ready. There were things she had not told him yet, and she could not let this become what it was trying to become until she did. She went to her room. She lay in the dark. She thought about 4 seconds and a half inch of air. She woke at 1 in the morning to the sound of her window. Not the wind, something else. A pressure, a wrongness in the air. Her wolf went from sleeping to screaming in the space of a breath, and Elara was on her feet before she was fully awake, and she had already moved to the far side of the room when the first of them came through the window. 3 wolves, shifted back to human form but barely. They moved with the controlled violence of people trained for a specific task. 1 went to the door. 2 came toward her. She was not afraid. That was the surprising thing. She was very, very clear. The door opened and Caspian was there, and she had never seen him in motion like this. Not controlled movement, not managed presence, but actually fighting, and it was not something she could look at calmly because he was fast and certain in the way of someone who had been doing this a long time. He handled 1. He reached the 2nd. The 3rd got past him. The 3rd one pinned her against the wall, not hurting her, holding her. He looked at her with the specific look of someone completing a job. "Come with me," he said. "Vex wants you alive." "Vex," she said. "He knows what you are," the man said. And then he said something else, quiet, almost impressed. "Silver." And something in Elara went very still. She had been holding her wolf back for 4 years. She had been pressing it down, keeping it small, refusing to let it out because she was afraid of what it was. She had been practicing this suppression so long that it had become automatic, reflexive, a wall she maintained without even thinking about it. The wall came down. She did not choose it, or rather, she chose not to stop it anymore, which was a different thing. She stopped saying no and simply let go, and what came out of her was not what she had feared. It was not violent or aggressive or hungry. It was simply enormous. Silver light moved through the room like water filling a space that had always been shaped for it. The wolf in the man went to his knees, not because she told it to. It simply had no other choice. It recognized something older than itself. Across the room, Caspian, who had just brought the 2nd attacker down, turned and looked at her. His wolf recognized it too. She watched the moment it happened, the slight widening of his eyes, the way his body changed. And then, slowly, his right knee touched the floor. He was back on his feet in 3 seconds. The light faded. Elara was herself again, just a woman in a bedroom at 1 in the morning, breathing hard, hands shaking now that the moment was over. Caspian looked at her across the room. His expression was not afraid. It was not angry. It was the expression of a man who has just learned something that rearranges everything he thought he knew, and is deciding, in real time, what to do with that. The attackers were secured. The palace guards arrived. Caspian gave directions without looking away from Elara for long, and when the room was quiet again and the guards had taken the 3 men away, he came and stood in front of her. She looked at him. She was very tired. Suddenly, the way you get tired after holding something heavy for too long and finally putting it down. "How long have you known?" he asked. Very quiet, very even. 4 years, she said. "Since the night I was supposed to shift. It came out and I pulled it back, and I've been holding it back since." "Why?" "Because I was frightened of it. Because I'd read what happened to the last ones. Because I didn't know who to trust with it." She looked at him. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you sorry you didn't tell me, or sorry I found out this way?" She thought about this honestly. "Both," she said. He nodded. He sat down on the edge of the bed, which was an oddly ordinary thing to do in this moment, and she realized that she was the one still standing, and she sat in the chair across from him. "Dorian Vex," he said. He's a rival alpha. He's been looking for any leverage he could find against my position for 2 years. If he knows about this, it means someone here told him. He looked at her directly. Not you. I know it wasn't you. How do you know? She asked. Not a challenge. Genuine question. Because you didn't even tell me, he said simply. And I've been far closer to you than Vex has. She looked at her hands. What happens now? What happens now is I'm going to have a serious conversation with my council about this. And you are not going to be treated as a political asset to be managed. You are going to be part of that conversation. She looked up at him. He looked back. You were afraid of me when I came into your power just now, she said. I went to my knee, he said, as if this were simply a fact he was stating. I don't do that. I know, she said. But I was back on my feet in 3 seconds, he said. Not because your power ended, because my wolf settled, because he recognized you. He paused. He's been trying to tell me something since the auction hall. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. She did not know what to say to that. The honesty of it was so straightforward that it left her without a response. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and outside the window the last hour of night was slowly beginning to fade. You should have been afraid of me, she said finally. I was afraid of you, he said. Just not the way you mean. He looked at the window. I was afraid that you'd leave. I've been afraid of that for a while. That's the fear I don't know what to do with. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, I'm not leaving. He did not respond to this immediately. He sat with it, which was one of the things she had come to understand about him. He did not respond to important things quickly. He let them settle into a true shape before he answered. Then he said quietly, Good. The council meeting the next morning was not easy. Hawthorne learned the truth with the expression of someone who had suspected there was a larger game being played, but had not guessed the shape of it. 3 council members looked at Elara like she had become a very interesting problem. 2 looked at her like she had become a very valuable weapon. She sat next to Caspian at the table, which was itself a statement he had made without announcing it, and she watched the council try to manage their reaction to the information. The council member named Aldrich spoke first. With respect, this changes everything. The Silver Fang lineage has implications for every existing pack alliance. We need to consider how to position this diplomatically. Position her, Caspian said. The correction was quiet, but absolute. Aldrich paused. Pardon? You said this. Her name is Elara. Position her. Aldrich looked at him, then at Elara, then back at his notes. He was a man who knew when to pick his battles. Yes, Elara. We need to consider her position diplomatically. Her position, Caspian said, is exactly what it was yesterday. She is my chosen. Nothing else changes without her agreement. Hawthorne, surprisingly, spoke up in a measured voice. I would like to say, for the record, that I oppose the king's choice at the outset. I would like to revise that position. She has conducted herself with more composure in this palace than many people I have known for years. She looked at Elara directly. I was wrong. Elara looked at the older woman. She had not expected this. She nodded once, a genuine acknowledgement. The meeting continued. By the end of it, they knew that someone in the council had been feeding information to Dorian Vex. They did not yet know who. This would need to be investigated quietly. They also knew that Vex would not stop with one attempt. Caspian decided they needed to go to the archivist. He explained this to Elara over dinner, just the 2 of them, which had become a habit without anyone scheduling it. The archivist was the oldest living wolf on record. She was blind and had been living alone in the mountains for 30 years and had refused every political invitation, summons, or request that had been sent to her. She responded only to direct visits, and only if she chose to. She might turn them away. Elara asked why she would choose to see them. Caspian said, she hasn't turned away a Silver Fang in 5 centuries, mostly because there haven't been any to turn away. They left before dawn, 2 days later. Minimal guard, which Elara appreciated because it meant he was trusting her judgment about her own ability to handle herself, rather than wrapping her in protection that said more about what people thought of her than what she actually needed. The journey took 2 days. They drove as far as the roads went, then walked. The mountains were wide and quiet in the way that high places are quiet, not silent, but filled with a different kind of sound, wind and water, and the movement of things that weren't human. They talked more during those 2 days than they had in all the weeks at the palace combined. Not about the council, or the bond, or Dorian Vex. About other things. She told him about the compound kitchen, about the 4 a.m. starts, about the small ways Mira had made herself feel invisible over years. Not to gain sympathy, just because they were walking together in the mountains, and it was the kind of conversation that walking in mountains invited. He told her about his father, who had been Alpha King before him, and who had been the kind of man who expressed affection through expectation rather than warmth, so that Caspian had spent his entire childhood trying to earn something that was never exactly withheld, but was also never exactly given. She said, "That sounds exhausting." He said, "It was." The cabin was small and old, and the archivist was inside it, already standing when they arrived, as if she had known they were coming. She was ancient in the specific way of very old wolves, which meant she looked 70, but moved like 30, and had the stillness of someone who had processed enough of life that they were no longer surprised by much of it. She was blind. Her eyes were milky and still, but she turned toward Elara the moment Elara walked in, before Caspian, before any introduction was made. "There you are," she said. "I wondered when you'd come." They spent the afternoon with her. She asked Elara to describe what had happened on the night of her first shift. She listened with total attention. She asked a few precise questions. She did not seem surprised by any of it. When Elara was done, the archivist nodded slowly. "Silver Fang," she said. "Last confirmed, approximately 490 years ago, the bloodline was believed extinct." A pause. "I told them at the time that you cannot kill the oldest things. They didn't listen." "What does it mean for her?" Caspian asked. He was sitting quietly to the side, present but not directing the conversation. "It means she is exactly what she is," the archivist said, which was not quite an answer to his specific question, but was clearly the only answer she was prepared to give. She turned toward Elara again. "You have been holding it back." "Yes," Elara said. "You will need to stop doing that." "I know." The archivist was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Elara had not expected. "There is one thing in the records that is often misunderstood about the Silver Fang." She folded her hands in her lap. "People believe that the Silver Fang bloodline gives you power over other wolves. This is not accurate." Elara waited. "The Silver Fang bloodline does not activate on its own," the archivist said. "It responds. It is not a weapon. It is a mirror. It reflects back the bond that already exists between two wolves." She paused. "Tell me, child, what was happening in the room when you shifted fully?" Elara thought about the bedroom, the attacker, Caspian across the room. "Someone was threatening me," she said. "And what did you feel, in the moment before you let go?" Elara was quiet. She thought about it honestly. "I felt him behind me," she said finally. "Not the attacker, Caspian. I felt him in the room, and I felt certain." She paused. "I felt like nothing could actually happen to me." The archivist nodded. "The bond between you is not new," she said. "The bond has been building since your first hour in the same space. The Silver Fang did not cause that. It revealed it. The power activated because the bond was already real. It needed only to be named." Caspian was very still. The archivist looked in his direction, though she could not see him. "You have been treating this as something you need to understand before you can act on it," she said. "You do not understand everything before you choose it. You chose her without knowing why. That was the truest thing you have done." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Caspian said, "Can she control it? When she shifts, is she in control of what happens?" "She has always been in control," the archivist said dryly. "She has spent 4 years demonstrating extraordinary control. The question you are actually asking is whether she can choose not to use it, and the answer is yes. The Silver Fang does not happen to its host. It responds to the host's choices." She paused. "She will need to practice, but she already knows how to carry it. She has been carrying it, carefully, for years." They stayed the night in the cabin, the archivist insisting without exactly inviting, the way old people sometimes make space for you without making it into an offer you can decline. Elara and Caspian sat by the fire after the archivist went to sleep. The fire was small and steady. Outside, the wind was cold. She was sitting on the floor, leaning against the base of the chair, and he was in the chair, and after a while his hand moved from the armrest to her shoulder, resting there lightly, not asking anything, just there. She did not move away from it. She leaned into it slightly, barely, just a degree. He noticed. His thumb moved, the smallest possible movement. They stayed like that until the fire burned low. "I should have told you," she said. She was looking at the fire. "I kept waiting until I understood what we were. But I think I was using that as an excuse." "You were protecting yourself," he said. "Yes. I understand that," he said. "I've been doing it longer than you have." She turned her head to look up at him. He was looking at the fire. "Zara told me about Lyra," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I thought as much. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter, because I think it does matter. I think it changed how you see everything that came after." She paused. "But I need you to know that I have not once, not for a single moment, been performing anything with you. What you see is all there is. There's nothing else." He turned to look at her. "I know," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you walked past my hand at the auction," he said. "A woman performing would have taken it." She thought about that. She almost smiled. "Also," he said, "because my wolf knows. He settled the moment you walked into the same room. He doesn't settle for performances." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire crackled. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He went very still. His eyes stayed on hers. She felt his pulse against her palm. Then she stood up on her knees and kissed him, and he kissed her back, and outside the mountain wind moved through the trees, and in the small cabin the only sound was the fire, and the careful, honest beginning of something that had been true for months, before either of them said so. They were back at the palace within 3 days. The political situation had not waited for them. Dorian Vex had made a formal declaration. He had contacted every alpha in the territory and sent a written challenge. His argument was this: the Silver Fang bloodline was, under the original accords, classified as an unregistered supernatural entity. Housing an unregistered entity was a violation of the treaty framework. Caspian was in breach. Elara must be surrendered to the Council of Five Packs for assessment and protective custody. Elara read the declaration at the kitchen table at the palace while Caspian read it at his desk. She thought, as she read, that protective custody was the politest possible way to say control. She thought about how many times in her life she had been placed somewhere in a way that was described as being for her own good. She put the document down on the table. "He's not wrong about the technical argument," she said. "No," Caspian agreed. "But he's not right about the conclusion." 3 packs sided with Vex within 48 hours. 2 sided with Caspian. The remaining 4 were watching. The meeting was called for a week out. Caspian began preparing. His lawyers, his counsel, his diplomatic team. The palace ran on organized urgency, people moving with purpose in every corridor. Elara did not participate in the preparation sessions. She spent her time in the library, but she was not reading history now. She was practicing. In the open courtyard off the east wing, late in the evenings when it was empty, she let her wolf out. Not fully. Small releases, careful and controlled. She was learning the shape of it again, familiarizing herself with something she had kept locked away for so long that she needed to relearn its edges. It was not frightening, she found. Not anymore. It felt like stretching after a long time of keeping still. Zara came to watch sometimes. She stood at the entrance to the courtyard and observed with the expression of someone watching something remarkable without wanting to make it self-conscious by saying so. Caspian found her there one evening. He stood in the doorway of the courtyard and watched without interrupting. She was silver in the dark, not blindingly so, just present, a soft radiance that moved with her. She shifted back to herself and saw him. "You're not afraid of it," he said. "Not anymore," she said. He came and stood near her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Are you ready for the meeting?" he asked. "Are you?" she returned. He thought about this. "I'm ready to fight," he said. "I'm not sure about the rest." "The rest is mine," she said. "I'll handle it." The Council of Five Packs met at the Veyrath Summit, which had the grim irony of being the same location as the auction, and Elara found this detail oddly clarifying. She had come here once before with nothing. She had left with everything changed. Now she was returning to decide what it was going to stay. The room was full of alphas and their councils and their lawyers and their judgment. Dorian Vex sat across the table with the composed look of a man who believed he had already won. He looked at Elara once, briefly, the way you look at something you plan to acquire. She looked back at him with absolutely no expression. The formal arguments began. Vex's legal team was thorough. Caspian's team responded point by point. It was careful and precise, and went on for 4 hours. Elara sat beside Caspian and listened, and did not perform patience because she was actually patient. Hawthorne, unexpectedly, delivered one of the most compelling legal counter-arguments of the morning. The old woman had prepared with thoroughness that suggested she had not slept much in the preceding week. Then Vex raised a hand and said quietly that he wanted to make an additional submission. His submission was simple, that the Silver Fang bloodline, if confirmed, was by its nature ungovernable by any single pack or alpha, and was therefore, by the same logic, ungovernable by the Alpha King. The power superseded the alliance structure entirely, which means, he said pleasantly, that no single person, including Blackthorn, has the right to speak for her or position her politically. She must be managed by collective consensus. This was, Elara noted, actually quite clever. He was using the argument of her autonomy to deny her autonomy. He was saying that because no one person could own her, everyone had to have a say. Elara stood up. The room went quiet. People stood up during submissions, not during discussions. But she was standing, and no one quite had the nerve to tell her to sit. "My name is Elara Voss," she said. "I understand that the question in this room is what to do with me." She looked around at the assembled alphas. "I want to save everyone some time. I was not registered under the Accords because my own family did not know what I was, and I chose not to identify myself because I had every historical reason to be afraid of what people would do with that information." She paused. "I am looking around this room right now, and I see that those concerns were reasonable." Vex began to speak. She continued without acknowledging him. "The Silver Fang bloodline is not a weapon, and it is not a resource, and it is not an asset to be managed by committee. I am a person who happens to carry it." She looked at Vex directly. "You want protective custody. What you mean is control, and the answer to that is no." A silence. Then one of the neutral pack alphas said, carefully, "The question of who has the authority to make that decision on her behalf." "I'm making it on my own behalf," she said. "It's not a complicated question." Another silence. She had the specific advantage of someone who had spent years being invisible. She was very comfortable in silences that other people found difficult. Vex's lawyer said, with great care, that in order for her self-determination claim to carry legal weight under the Accords, she would need to demonstrate the bloodline was genuine. "All right," she said. She shifted. Not fully. She had enough control now that she could choose the degree. What moved through the room was not aggressive. It was not commanding in the way of an order. It was simply ancient. It was simply utterly certain. It was 500 years of something that had survived against every effort to destroy it, and it was standing in a council room in a tailored jacket, and it was done being managed. Every wolf in the room, including the ones whose alphas had sided with Vex, went briefly, involuntarily still, not to their knees, just still, the way you go still when something very large and very fundamental passes close to you and you remember, for just a moment, what you actually are in the scale of things. Dorian Vex's wolf, which was one of the strongest in the territory, went to its knees. He fought it. He won after a moment. But everyone in the room had seen him fight it. She stopped the shift. She sat back down. "I think," she said evenly, "that demonstrates both the bloodline and the self-determination." Nobody challenged the formal vote that followed. The result was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The demand for protective custody was withdrawn. Vex's challenge to Caspian's authority was overruled, and a new motion was passed, at Hawthorne's quiet suggestion, to open a formal review of several very old Accord provisions, starting with the one that had led to the original hunting of the Silver Fang bloodline 5 centuries ago. Caspian had not spoken during any of this. On the drive back, he looked at her with something she could not immediately name. She thought about it for a while, and then she understood. It was the look of someone who had been prepared to fight for something, and had found that the thing they were prepared to fight for had gone ahead and handled it. She said, "Were you planning to intervene?" "Yes," he said, "but you didn't need me to." "No," she agreed, "but it mattered that you were ready to." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He reached over and took her hand on the seat between them. She looked down at it. She turned her hand over and held his. They rode the rest of the way like that, not talking, not performing, just together. The mate mark appeared 3 days later. They were standing on the palace balcony in the early morning, before anyone else was awake, in the habit they had recently developed of sharing the first part of the day there with coffee and quiet. The city below was just beginning to move. Elara felt it first, a warmth at her wrist. She looked down. There was a mark there, silver and black intertwined, the lines moving against her skin like they were settling into a shape that had always been meant for her. She said, "Caspian." He looked. Then he pulled back the collar of his shirt and looked at his own shoulder. The same mark, same colors, mirror image. They stood there looking at each other. The archivist said the bond was already real. She said. "She did," he said. "She was right. She was." A pause. She looked at her wrist, at the mark moving softly against her skin. She had lived so long being marked as nothing that being marked as something took a moment to understand. "I'm not afraid of this," she said. Not to him exactly, more just saying it out loud because it needed to be said. "Neither am I," he said. And then, "I was, for a long time, you know that." "I know," she said. "I'm not anymore." She looked at him. He was looking at her with the unguarded expression she had started to see more of lately, the one he didn't show the council or the lawyers or the assembled packs, the one that was just him. She reached up and put her hand against his chest. He covered it with his. His heartbeat was steady and present and very real. "You chose me before you knew," she said. "I'd choose you again knowing everything," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Below them the city was waking up, ordinary and ongoing, the world turning in its ordinary way. "I'm glad it was you," she said. "I'm glad it was you at the auction. I didn't think I'd ever say that." "Neither did I," he said. The mating auction was abolished 6 weeks later. Caspian brought the proposal to the combined council with careful documentation of why it had always been structurally unjust. Hawthorne had quietly drafted the legal language, which was precise and watertight. The vote passed with no dissenting voices, which surprised no one more than Hawthorne herself, who had expected a fight and had prepared 3 separate counter-arguments that she never needed to deliver. Elara sat beside Caspian when he signed the document. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence there was its own kind of statement. Dorian Vex was stripped of his alpha title in a separate proceeding. The evidence that had come out during the council investigation, including the paid informant within the palace and the organized attack on Elara, was detailed and thorough. His pack requested that they be allowed to choose their own new leader. Elara was asked, in an unofficial and somewhat awkward message from the pack's beta council, if she would name a preference. She wrote back that the choice belonged entirely to them and that she had no political preferences regarding their internal governance, and that she trusted them to know their own pack better than she did. The response she received in return was respectful and slightly surprised in tone, as if they had expected something different. Zara was appointed head healer of the Blackthorn pack. She received this information with the specific expression of someone who has been quietly excellent at their job for a long time and had genuinely not been expecting anyone to notice. She accepted without making a ceremony of it, which was exactly the right approach. Mira arrived at the palace 3 weeks after the council meeting. Elara had been told she was coming. She sat in the small receiving room off the east entrance and waited. Mira walked in and looked at her with the expression of someone who had been working out what expression to wear on the way over and had landed on something between apology and assessment. "You've done well," Mira said, not warmly, but not cruelly. I've been myself, Elara said. I was always going to be fine if I had room to be that. Mira was quiet. Something moved in her expression that Elara had not seen before. The smallest possible crack in the long armor of someone who had never had to be anything other than the favored one. I wasn't kind to you, Mira said. No, Elara agreed. I should have been. Elara looked at her stepsister for a long time. She was not angry. She had thought she would be, had thought that standing in front of Mira from a position of strength would feel like something she'd been owed. It didn't, particularly. It felt mostly like standing in front of someone she had once known well and did not need anything from anymore. What do you want? She asked. A chance, Mira said. Not to start over, just to do better. Elara thought about this. She thought about Zara, and about the leaf on the windowsill, and about the 4 seconds in the library. She thought about the ways people changed when they were given space instead of walls. All right, she said, but I'm not going to pretend things between us were something other than what they were. I'm not asking you to, Mira said. There was no warmth in the room yet, but there was something that wasn't coldness either. Something that might, in time, become something workable. Elara decided that was enough. Mira left. Elara sat in the receiving room for a little while longer, looking at the window. The field was half an hour from the palace. Elara had found it on a walk 3 weeks ago, and had told Caspian about it that evening, not with any particular intent, just because she found herself telling him things the way you tell things to people who are simply part of your daily world. He had said, "Show me." So they went, early on a Sunday morning, while the city was still slow. They parked at the side of a farm road and walked the rest of the way through wet grass, their breath making small clouds in the cool air. The field was wide and flat and edged with old trees, and the sky above it was the specific pale blue of very early morning slowly becoming day. Elara stopped in the middle of the field. She had shifted alone, in the dark, at 18, in terror. She had shifted in a bedroom under attack, driven by necessity. She had shifted in a council room, by choice but with something still to prove. She had not yet shifted simply because she wanted to. She let go. The silver was different outdoors. Not contained, not compressed into a space. It moved outward and outward again, easy and large, the way water moves when you open your hand over a wide surface. She was not afraid of it. She was not trying to manage it. She was simply herself, all the way herself, for the first time. She ran, not away from anything, just ran, because the field was there and the morning was there and she had spent years learning to be small and the world was larger than that, and she was larger than that. Caspian ran beside her. His wolf was large and dark, almost black, moving with the kind of ease that came from many years of knowing himself completely. They ran side by side in the wide field, and the silver and the black moved together against the pale morning grass. They ran until the sun was properly up, and the field was gold instead of blue, and both of them stopped, breathing hard, in the middle of it, and looked at each other. She shifted back. He shifted back. They stood in the morning light, and she was laughing, a real laugh, not a polite one, the kind that came from somewhere completely unguarded, and after a moment, he was laughing too, which was a sound she would not have believed was possible from this man if she had been told about it 5 months ago. "We should go back," he said finally. "We should," she agreed. Neither of them moved for another minute. She thought about the girl who had stood on that auction platform in a gray dress that used to be white and had decided not to feel anything because feeling things required too much energy, and she did not feel sorry for that girl exactly. She felt something more specific and more gentle than sorry. She felt the way you feel about a version of yourself that survived something by becoming very still, and who deserved to be told that the stillness was no longer necessary. You can move now, she thought. You can take up space. You were always allowed to. Caspian took her hand. She looked down at their hands together, at the marks on her wrist and his shoulder that they carried now like a signature from something older and more certain than either of them. She had come to this world with nothing. She had not tried to. She had not performed or strategized or made herself something she wasn't. She had simply been herself. carefully and honestly and without apology, and it had turned out that this was exactly the thing that changed everything. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at the field. She looked at the sky. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, and they walked back through the wet grass toward everything that was waiting. "Storm!"